Welcome to Talking Yoga. We're joined today by Kino MacGregor. Kino, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We're excited to learn a bit about yoga from you.
See if I can help you out with that.
Chris in Oklahoma asks, you were able to spend extended periods of time with Pattabhi Jois and get that direct transmission and the intensity of the study. But he's saying for people like himself, he usually only gets to spend time with you in weekend workshops.
Right.
So what balance do you recommend people find between that deep study period and the direct transmission and accessibility of what they can find?
Well, first and foremost, the yoga journey is an individual journey. It's a path that is at once very, very intense and very, very solitary. And this is something that I think in the beginning, not a lot of people understand, and it's something I didn't understand in the beginning either. And if you get used to joining group classes or you get very dependent on having your teacher present, sometimes we can decentralize the journey and make it, and we start to think it's about spending time with many, many other people and being close to your teacher. So while that really plays a large impact on setting you on the right path, I really believe that this is a journey that each individual student must walk by themselves. And we put one foot in front of the other every time that we practice. And the role of the teacher, I think, is to inspire people to practice and to guide them, almost like a light into the darkness of the path. But it is still the student that must walk that path, regardless of however bright the teacher can shine their light. So from my perspective, I would go to India and I would spend time with Guruji and I would spend time with Sharat. And I still do this every year with Sharat. And I'll spend between a month now and up to 6 months when I had a lot of free time. But then in the duration between when I was in India versus when I saw my teacher again, I would practice alone. And I wouldn't have anyone assisting me and I wouldn't have any guidance. It would just be me practicing. And I found that it was actually those periods when I was truly on my own that I began to understand how deeply we can let the work of yoga integrate in terms of our own spiritual practice, and how doing this discipline is part of your daily routine when you don't have the support of a community around you can make you so much stronger and so much more grounded in your commitment to live yoga as a lifestyle. So for any students that are inspired by me that can only find me in workshops, I would say that keep that inspiration as a seed and then tend it every day with your own daily practice so that you're nurturing that seed. And when the roots of the spiritual practice really build in your own life, then all of these, any time you spend with your teacher will be building those roots, but those roots are your own. They're your own personal practice that you'll get established in and you'll get inspired by. Guruji, Guruji definitely couldn't be there every day of my practice, but I also keep a picture of him on my home altar. And then when I feel that I'm not so inspired to practice, I look up and I see his image and I feel that I'm closer to the practice because I see him there. Sure, I'd recommend to put a picture of your teacher nearby so that you get the inspiration to practice.
Can you tell us some other stories about your experiences in India? Some of the personal interactions you had with Pattabhi Jois, what he may have given you personal instructions on.
So there were a couple of things that really sort of come to mind. My very first trip to India, my very first trip to Mysore, was probably the first thing that I ever really knew that I wanted in my life. Before I started doing yoga, I was kind of floating and I was looking for what am I going to do with my life? And it was sort of, this big question of, your late teens, early 20s, what are you going to major in college? What are you going to do with your life? What kind of job are you going to have? And I was just floating. Maybe I'll do this. Maybe I'll do that. I had an internship here and I'll go to graduate school and delay the decision even longer. And, floating around and all these different things. And I never really had a clear, I want to do this. But the night that I finished Pattabhi Jois' book, Yoga Mala, I woke up with this clear distinction. I have to go to India. I've got to go. And so I bought my ticket and I went to India when I'd been doing Ashtanga Yoga less than a year. And even though this was something I really wanted, and it was the first thing in my life that I felt directed and inspired to do, I spent the week before I went to India collecting all sorts of resistance. I was living in New York at the time. I was at NYU. I was studying feminist studies in graduate school, and I invented all of these whole things about how the culture of bowing down to a guru is patriarchal, and I started to question all these things, and I'm not going to bow down to some man, and they all say I need to do this because it was a traditional pranam, they put your hands on the guru's feet, and I sat there for a week, and I just made a little war with myself. In my own mind, I wasn't really talking to anyone about it, or sit there, and be like, oh, I'm not going to do this, oh, when I get there, oh, they all say, and I just sit there, I would just sit there in this little, like, anxiety-riddled sort of state of manic aggression, you could say. And I thought about it the whole trip, you know, what's it going to be like, and how are women treated, and all these sort of things. Then I get to India. I'm at the Shala, the taxi that picked me up from Bangalore dropped me off at Guruji Shala, and I'm there with this giant backpack. And then I look into Guruji's eyes, and before I can say anything, my hands are on his feet. You know, and so it was really the sort of first experience of my heart opening before my mind could really question. And that was probably one of the first times that anything like that ever happened for me, where the experience was so poignant and so overwhelming that all of my mental questioning simply vanished. And that was probably, again, the first experience of something like that. And I really feel in that moment, all of my vulnerability that I'd been protecting was really sort of laid out in the open. And it was a place that I wasn't comfortable with. And I don't think there was another person on this earth that I could have trusted with that vulnerability. And in all of the times that I practiced with Guruji, his integrity as a human being for me was unquestionable. And that's what gave me the space, I think, to be able to open my heart to him just in that initial meeting. And then every time I asked him a question, he always answered me with sincerity. And I remember I would go to him sometimes if there were injuries or something like that came in the body or pain, and he was nothing but supportive with me. And I know a lot of people tell stories about how harsh Guruji was, but he just wasn't like that with me. For example, I went there, I had a pain in my shoulder, and I wasn't really sure what to do. I was in India for 6 months, and the pain in the shoulder was not getting any better. And I went to talk to Guruji about it, and I said, Guruji, I have a pain in my shoulder, and it's not getting better. And he looked at me, and he just looked at me for a moment, and he smiled, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and he held my shoulder for a moment, and then he smiled, and he said, you good food eating, automatically it is correcting. Automatically it is correcting. Trusting, trusting. And he just said that and smiled, and he just held my gaze for a moment. And what was interesting is I definitely probably wasn't eating that healthy. And he was able to sort of tune into me with that. And you know, before I did yoga, I was not really a healthy person. I was more just kind of a partier and, you know, being in school and a student and that sort of thing. But he just, every time I had a doubt, he would support me. And he would give me a gentle guidance to continue along the spiritual path. And he was never, ever harsh with me. He was this sort of gentle guide. And I really appreciated that. And I don't think that, I just don't think that I could have really had any other instruction in the beginning. After I spent about 5 years studying with him, then I think after that a relationship was established and I was a much stronger person, then he started to yell at me. But it took about 5 years of him really tending that seed and letting the root of the spiritual practice grow. I was not a naturally strong person when I started the practice. So I think that to his credit, I think he recognized my sincerity of wanting to find a way out of an unhappy life and then really nurturing that until the point where I could take sort of stronger feedback and rise to the occasion.
So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.